The Voice of Elijah newsletter. January 2018. It would be best to not call God a liar. Read by Chris, an AI from play.ht. In the January 2017 issue of the Voice of Elijah newsletter, I told you that the Apostle Paul makes a statement in the second chapter of 2 Corinthians, that one can easily overlook if one doesn't know what he has in mind. But I also said that if one does know what he is talking about, it becomes a stark reminder of the pitched battle in which the Lord demands that each and every one of his children not only participate but also come out triumphant. Therefore, I showed you what Paul says, and then I explained what he knows, that you need to know, if you intend to overcome the wiles of Satan here at the end of the age. In the April 2017 issue of the Voice of Elijah newsletter, I first reviewed what I had told you in the January issue. Then I explained how the renewing of the mind that Paul mentions in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, fits together with the things I had already explained in those issues. But in both of those issues, I included the following statement. Most folks who call themselves Christians today don't believe there is only one truth to be found in the Hebrew Scriptures. Instead, they believe there is some sort of smorgasbord of truths, from which one just picks and chooses whatever truth they find most acceptable. The truth is, the apostles fully understood the message of the Hebrew Scriptures and they made no bones about it. They also believed that anybody who believed something that contradicted the truth they understood was not going to be saved. Paul states that, emphatically in the first chapter of the book of Galatians. What Paul says in that passage should settle the issue for anyone with half a brain, but unfortunately, most Christians today are content to go on believing the mishmash of contradictory beliefs they have heard in the distorted remnants of the church established by the apostles. It has never occurred to them that the New Testament clearly reveals the leaders of the apostolic church believed but one truth, and they also believed the truth that they possessed can be found in the Hebrew Scriptures. After stating that, I gave you a summary of the message of the Old Testament. 1. 2 Adams are mentioned in the creation account. The Apostle Paul talks about those 2 Adams in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 45 through 49. Genesis chapter 1 describes the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the image and likeness of God on the 6th day of creation. Genesis chapter 2 describes the creation of our forefather on the 3rd day. I have already explained these things in the booklet titled, In the Image and Likeness of God and in the October 2017 issue of this newsletter. 2. When God banned Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, He gave them the promise that they could be created in the image and likeness of God, if they would only believe the promise. He also expected them to hand down the promise from one generation to the next as an inheritance, that each heir of the promise could bequeath to the next heir of the promise, as an oral blessing. The book of Genesis is an account of how the patriarchs did that very thing. I have already explained these things in The Inheritance of the Believer, Volume 1. 3. The central purpose of the covenant God made with the sons of Israel at Mount Sinai was to unify the promise after Jacob divided it up when he blessed his sons and grandsons. Since there was no longer just one heir of the promise as there had been up to that time, God used the Mosaic covenant to create corporate Israel, a corporate body, that He claimed as His firstborn son. That corporate body functioned as a mediator, to hold title to the promise until Jesus Christ became corporate Israel, the heir of the promise. I have also explained these things in Not All Israel is Israel and the Inheritance of the Believer, Volume 1. 4. Under the terms of the law of Moses, An individual member of corporate Israel could be cut off from corporate Israel. Various parts of that law demanded that ultimate punishment. If the sons of Israel were aware that someone had violated one of those, they were expected to execute the individual and thereby erase his name from Israel. Even if they did not do that, God would cut him off from corporate Israel. That is, he would erase the individual's name from the census book of Israel that he maintained. For that reason, God alone knew who had been cut off from corporate Israel, and no one else had the right to say anyone was still a member of corporate Israel. I have already explained these things in Not All Israel is Israel. 5. God made 2 covenants with the sons of Israel at Mount Sinai. The first covenant required the perfect obedience of the corporate body, and did not provide a means of atonement. If one individual sinned, every member of the corporate body became guilty. The second covenant provided a means of atonement for the individual. If an individual sinned, his sin could be atoned for, through a sacrificial ritual, but the corporate body still remained guilty. I have also explained these things in The Inheritance of the Believer, Volume 1. 6. Because the sons of Israel failed to adhere to the requirements of both the first and second Mosaic covenants, the prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel promised them God would offer a new covenant to the individual members of corporate Israel. He did that through the ministry of John the Baptist. But the new covenant that the Jews accepted at that time was just like the first old covenant their ancestors had accepted at Mount Sinai. It provided no means of atonement. If a person sinned, he would immediately be cut off from corporate Israel. So God cut off from corporate Israel all the members of corporate Israel, other than Jesus Christ, because they could not keep the terms of the new covenant. I have also explained these things in Not All Israel is Israel. 7. When Jesus Christ was baptized by John and accepted the terms of the new covenant, he became corporate Israel, the heir of the promise. Therefore, when he died, he atoned for the sins of corporate Israel by suffering under the curses of the Mosaic covenant. But because of his obedience to the terms of the new covenant, God was obligated to fulfill the promise and resurrect him, so that he could inherit what was promised to Adam and Eve, creation in the image and likeness of God. I have also explained these things in Not All Israel is Israel, and in the pages of the Voice of Elijah newsletter, and the Voice of Elijah update over the past quarter of a century. 8. When Christ died, his death invoked the terms of the oral testament he had made prior to his death. Under the terms of that oral testament, all anyone has to do to inherit the promise is believe it, and apologize to God for the sins they have committed. Those who do that will be declared not guilty by God. Those who don't, won't. I have also explained these things in the pages of the Voice of Elijah newsletter and the Voice of Elijah update, over the past quarter of a century. I told you that, if you intend to triumph over the enemy of your soul, you need to believe the things I outlined in the 8 paragraphs above, and you also need to know why you have chosen to believe them. That is because the truth they provide is a refuge in which your soul can hide, whenever you face a fierce onslaught of enemy forces. Without them, you will have nothing you can use to defend against the lies that Satan propagates, for the sole purpose of destroying the souls of men. I also told you that, for that reason, I plan to write a series of articles in which I provide a summary explanation of those 8 parts of the teaching. I began with the first item on the list above in the October 2017 issue, and I am going to continue with the second item in this issue. In the article I wrote for the October 2017 issue of this newsletter, I concluded with a list of things you need to know and believe, if you intend to triumph over the winds that are going to blow here at the end of the age. I said this. The truth regarding the biblical account of God's decision to create Jesus Christ, the second Adam, in his own image and likeness is this. 1. Genesis chapter 1 is a summary overview of everything God has done with regard to his decision to create Jesus Christ in his own image and likeness. 2. Genesis chapters 2 through 4 explain some of the events that led up to God's decision to create Jesus Christ in his own image and likeness. 3. The first 2 verses of Genesis chapter 5 are an introduction to Moses' account of why God decided to create Jesus Christ in his own image and likeness. 4. Moses' account of why God decided to create Jesus Christ in his own image and likeness begins in Genesis chapter 5, verse 3, and goes through Genesis chapter 8. 5. Genesis chapter 9, verses 1 through 7, is a summary of God's announcement of his intention to begin the process of creating Jesus Christ in his own image and likeness. You need to keep those things in mind if you want to know the truth with regard to the message of the Scriptures, but you also need to know the creation of Jesus Christ in the image and likeness of God is the very focus of the Scriptures in which God has revealed his plan and purpose for the salvation of mankind. His fulfillment of that plan began with the resurrection of Jesus Christ in his own image and likeness, and it will conclude with the resurrection of all male and female believers in that same image and likeness. That is the truth regarding the parabolic image of the new birth, by which one becomes a child of God. But only those who believe the truth here at the end of the age will participate in that event. All others will be discarded. In this article, I intend to go back to the very beginning of the biblical account of God's plan of salvation, and recount the things you need to know and believe if you intend to be one of those who participate in the resurrection of the righteous. The story begins immediately after Adam and Eve admitted their sin to God. But first, I want to show you a part of the apostolic teaching that you may never have considered. Maybe then it will be easier for you to see the truth in the things I am going to tell you later on.